Trick-or-treating where I was growing up is a lot different than most people might have experienced, whether that be today or even back then. We didn't go out walking, going from house to house. We lived very far out in the country, on a really big ridge. The houses were not very close together at all, so it would take forever to do standard house-to-house trick-or-treating. We had to drive to each house individually. Now, most people were pretty religious in that area, but they weren't so bad they wouldn't give out candy on Halloween or anything. There were some people, though, who were so deeply religious that they really thought it was the devil's holiday or some other nonsense like that, and they would absolutely take no part in it whatsoever. Those people would either put a sign on their mailbox stating they didn't give out candy, or simply turn all their lights off so nobody would come by anyway. The parents driving their children around would know this and just avoid those particular houses. For all of my early trick-or-treating experiences, my parents would drive us around. A few of my cousins would come along too, and we would have a good time together. It went that way for many years. The first time my parents did not drive us trick-or-treating was when I was 12 years old. The reason behind this is that my older brother Ray had just gotten his driver's license. He had also been gifted a very old pickup truck that many of my uncles had worked on, so he could have a vehicle for his birthday present. My parents decided that since Ray had his own vehicle now, he would be the one driving us to go trick-or-treating. At the time, Ray really wanted to go out with his buddies. I assume he wanted to go out drinking or something, but I didn't know that for sure. Obviously, he was not really happy with having to take us out all night. However, I think he thought he could get the trick-or-treating done with early, and he might be able to salvage at least part of the night and go off to be with all his friends. Ray did have one of his friends with him in the front cab of the truck. I can't remember the name of the guy for some reason. Me, my younger brother, and 3 of my cousins had to ride in the bed. We all thought that just made Halloween a lot scarier than it usually was. It was so dark out there on the ridge, and riding in the back of the truck like that made us so susceptible to any scary things that went bump in the night. While we were driving around, we did our best to try and scare each other between each stop. It was kind of working, and we did get scared, but we were all okay with that because it was really fun. No one was seriously trying to traumatize each other or anything. Most of the houses we went to, things went pretty routinely. We would pull up in the driveway of a house that had its lights on. Many times there would be Halloween decorations on the house or in the yard, which let us know we were welcome there. Oftentimes there would also be people sitting out on the porch already, dressed warmly and waiting for the children to come up to their house and get their candy. Those were the ones that we liked the best. However, when we came upon a house that had its lights out, my brother would just drive past them. It really didn't take Ray much time, though, to get tired of everything. He knew he had to keep us out because if he brought us back early, my parents would be very mad with him. They wouldn't let him take the truck out after to do anything else. Although he couldn't take us home, he decided to find other ways for himself to have fun. Ray seemed to really know what could possibly scare us, and so the next time he came to a house that had no lights on, he stopped and made as if he was going to turn down that driveway. He didn't actually do it, mind you. He just jerked the truck a few times as if he was going to turn but never did. He asked us whether we should go and try that house out. We let him know we didn't want to, since we knew we weren't supposed to. It scared us because we didn't want to get into any sort of altercation with people who lived out in the country. Ray kept pretending he was going to turn in, though, just to see how we would react. When he and his friend had finally had enough of teasing us about it, he would take off down the road again. We visited a few more accepting houses, until he implied once more he was going to try to go to a house that had its lights out. After doing that so many times, though, we caught on that Ray wasn't ever actually going to go through with it. That was when we stopped responding in a way he found satisfying. If you know teenage boys who like to torment younger kids, then you know they don't like it when their tormenting stops working. Ray was not the type of person to let himself be so easily defeated either. He decided to take it up a notch when he came across the next house that had their lights out. This time, he actually did turn into their driveway. We still didn't react much because we were sure he wouldn't actually go too far down. Not reacting was still getting to him though, I guess, and he wasn't going to back down. So eventually, when he didn't get the reactions he wanted, he decided to really pull out the stops and scare the crap out of us. The driveway of this darkened house was pretty long. It was almost like a road all on its own. We were not convinced he would go all the way though. My younger brother was a bit concerned, but I tried to convince him Ray was just messing with us. He kept driving closer and closer to this house, but he was doing so deliberately slowly. The other kids were getting seriously freaked out, and I was doing my best to try and keep them as calm as possible. It certainly wasn't easy though. Ray's friend was making spooky and scary noises, obviously trying to get the kids even more worked up than they already were. Me, I was just hoping either no one was home at that house, or they wouldn't be too upset that we were approaching. My brother stopped a few car lengths away, and he told us to get out and go up to the house. None of us really wanted to. I told Ray the joke was over and that he had scared the kids enough. He should go ahead and pull out of the driveway. Ray was having none of it though. He kept insisting that we get out and go up there, and that until we did so, we were not going to leave. He sounded like he really meant it too. I kept telling him he was just going to get himself in trouble by doing all this when Mom and Dad found out. That didn't seem to deter him at all though. I told him that finally, if he left the other kids alone, I would go up there myself. I quietly crept out the back of the truck. I was not looking forward to this. I knew that some of these people could be real cranky if you came up to their homes on Halloween night, furious even, but I kept hoping I was right when I told the kids no one was home. I crept up to the house prepared to find out. By the time I got to the porch, a couple of things happened at the same time. A light came on, and a big old guy opened the door. He was holding a knife in his hand. It sure didn't look like he was trying to give me a friendly Halloween scare, though. He looked absolutely pissed and started yelling at me to take my demon worship somewhere else. I nearly fell down, but was able to catch myself and turn around. I guess Ray thought it was funny or something. He began to drive out of the driveway without me. I had to run as fast as I could trying to catch up to the truck. I had to try and not think of that guy on the porch with a knife possibly following me. Roy toyed with me a bit before I finally was able to get my hand on the truck bed. Even then, he just sped up even more, which could have caused me to fall down and have an accident. Fortunately though, that didn't happen. I was able to stabilize myself and pull myself onto the back. When we drove off, I looked back and saw the guy in the yard not far behind me. By that point though, Ray pulled quickly out of the driveway and then back onto the road. He and his friend were laughing at me, but that laughing didn't last for very long. My younger brother was traumatized, and he told my father what Ray had done. Not only did he not get to take the truck out that night, he wasn't allowed to take it out for a long time afterward either. Serves him right. I lived in the same house for all my childhood years. It was a very nice 3-level house that was set in a country setting. It was a nice and beautiful area out in the hills. Our closest neighbor lived just down the hill from us. Our dogs would even venture out to each other's houses or into the woods to play together. Other than this, if you didn't know someone was coming over, such as a friend or family member, you basically never saw people hanging out in your yard or really around your house at all. Around the time this story takes place, I had gotten to the age where I didn't really want to go trick-or-treating anymore. I figured I was too old for it, although I can't remember what my exact age at the time was. I still had younger siblings, though, that my parents still had to take out. That meant that this Halloween, I decided I was going to stay home all by myself. I liked hanging out in the dark when I was home alone. Being that it was Halloween night, that just made this something I wanted to do even more. I was chilling out at home in the dark watching some television. I was in the front room of the house, which faced out toward the road. We had a really huge yard, and our house was right in the middle of it. There was still a lot of room around though, and it wasn't always easy to make out that anything was going on around in the yard. I don't know why it caught my eye at first, but I noticed there was some sort of light coming from outside. As I noticed it, I also noticed it seemed like it was moving. Although it was in the front yard, it was nowhere near our driveway. Whatever this light was, it must be coming from out in the woods or something. And so I found myself immediately interested. But what really got me interested was the way that it was moving. We didn't have any light outside other than the front and back porch lights, and those wouldn't be enough for me to make out what was going on that far out in the yard. I got up and walked over toward the window, trying to check out and see what I was looking at here. I even went outside on the porch to look around. I left the lights out though. Although I couldn't completely make out what was going on, there were obviously some people out there in the yard. I couldn't tell what was making the lights though. I didn't know what to do. I went and grabbed a rifle. I didn't want to take any chances of some sickos doing something out there to hurt someone on Halloween. Lord knows that's when those sort of people come out that like doing scary things, especially out in the country. When I got into the yard and was headed towards their direction, I was able to make out some more of the noises they were making. There were quite a few people out there. I called out that I didn't know who they were, but I did have a gun on me, and they better get out of my yard because I wasn't afraid to use it. I could tell right away they were carrying a jack-o'-lantern that looked like it had a devil carved into it. They dropped it on the ground when they noticed I indeed had a gun. There had to be 3 people there at least. They turned and took off, jumping over the fence and heading back out into the woods. When I got closer, I noticed I was right about this jack-o'-lantern. I opened it and put out the fire. I'm not sure why I did this, but I also shot the pumpkin as well. I didn't like that devil drawing it had on it. I turned around and went back to the house. I didn't know who those people were, and I didn't find out what they wanted either. Considering they didn't come right up to my house to trick-or-treat like normal people though, I can't imagine it was good in any way. This is the story of something that happened to me when I was around 13 years old. My family lived in a relatively rural area. On Halloween, we had to drive to different little neighborhoods in order to do trick-or-treating. We didn't live in town, but we would drive in to do a little bit of our trick-or-treating. We lived ourselves in an area where there were hills and dirt roads, and no sidewalks at all. Out there, you would have to drive a little ways to get to the next house. While you were in town though, you could just walk from house to house like normal trick-or-treaters would be doing. My family was pretty poor when I was growing up. I really wanted to be Freddy Krueger that year for Halloween. Of course, my family really couldn't afford to get me anything at all resembling a convincing costume. The glove they were able to get me, called the Night Stalker glove, was a simple black cloth glove with some paper-thin floppy blades on it. I knew we didn't have the money for anything better though, so I was pretty happy with just this. Now, when we were out of town, we were with our parents in the car driving from house to house, but generally, once we got to it, we would be going house to house by ourselves. For the most part, that was what we liked most. Our parents would just let us go off on our own. And that was for us what trick-or-treating was all about. It was much nicer not being saddled with your parents during that time. I was not a very large 13-year-old. I was also the oldest of the kids that were dropped off in town. So not only was I in charge, but I guess I was supposed to protect the other kids too. I didn't really see this coming into play, however. We were just some kids out having fun on trick-or-treat night. What could possibly go wrong? Something did happen as we approached one of the houses, though. There were some older kids hanging out on the porch. They looked like they may have been around 17 years old. They definitely didn't look like the nicest folks in the world either. Sorry to seem judgmental just by looking at a few people, but their behavior made me feel like I wanted to go ahead and skip this one. We decided not to, though. We were walking up to the house when I heard the boys making some remarks about our costumes. One seemed to notice my really cheap Freddy glove and began making some mean remarks towards the cheapness of my costume. He also started saying things about how he hated Freddy Krueger and was such a Jason fan. This was in the late 80s, before the two fought each other in a real movie, so there was a strong rivalry between fans of the two franchises, I guess. The words they were throwing at me made me wish I'd just decided to walk past this house. I tried not to let it show that they bothered me though. I wanted the younger kids to be able to have their trick-or-treating without any fuss. After everyone got their candy, the older boys were yelling at me to get out of their yard. They didn't want someone dressed like I was there. I still thought all of this was dumb, but I decided to go ahead and walk away. I don't think the younger kids understood what was going on anyway, being that none of them watched scary movies. The only thing they were concerned about was getting their candy, and I was happy to get away from here as quick as possible. Only, things didn't end there. Once we got to the end of the street that we were on, we turned around to go back down the other side. When the boys saw us walking on the other side of the street, they got up and started to walk over. They were yelling all kinds of nasty things at me. I was wondering what the hell their deal was. I had no idea why they were so intent on tormenting me in particular, but they were making this whole trick-or-treat experience pretty lousy for us kids. When we were down another street a while later, I heard a sound coming from behind one of the houses. I looked over, and suddenly someone wearing a hockey mask came running out from in between. He also had a machete, which I was able to tell quite easily was not fake. He came rushing straight for me, sending the kids screaming away from me. I, on the other hand, tripped when trying to run off. The guy trying to scare me with the mask and machete jumped on top of me. For a moment or two, he was just laying on top until he started screaming himself. I don't know how I did it, but I was able to get out from under this kid. Well, I noticed why he was screaming now. He'd fallen right onto his own machete he was carrying and cut several of his own fingers off. They were just laying there on the ground. I didn't know what to do. I realized I had to catch up to the other kids. I was supposed to be watching them. I ran after them as other people began running over to the kid laying on the ground screaming. I took the kids back to the car and we drove out of there without me telling my parents what happened, other than we were being bullied. Honestly, I didn't know how to tell them about that accident that just happened. I never had anything happen to me due to this incident either. We were all dressed in costumes, and the guy who came after me tried to scare me with a real machete. I doubted he wanted the situation to be looked into any further himself. I guess he got his fingers sewed back on or something, but I hope the incident will keep him from doing something like that ever again. I grew up in a much different environment than I live in right now. In fact, right now I live in a huge metropolitan area. I grew up living on a ridge in Ohio. It was a much different way of life. I mean, here we're surrounded by people. The houses on the ridge and the surrounding hills were not so close together though. On Halloween, when trick-or-treaters are out in my current neighborhood, the kids just go door to door everywhere. Well, where I grew up, we could have driven into town to go trick-or-treating, or we could also do so on the ridge. This might seem weird to some people, but we'd all hop into the bed of the pickup truck and our parents would drive us from house to house throughout my neighborhood. This was the way I usually experienced Halloween. When my older brother was 14, my parents let him drive the pickup truck around the area. Again, this was not so unusual for that time in the area we lived in. Even growing up myself, I was driving way before I got my license. That's a story for another time though. Having my brother drive made their life a lot easier. He would drive us younger kids around, so my parents didn't have to do so. I was 12 this year. My younger brother that went with us was 9, and my best friend at the time was a boy named Kenny. We loaded up in the back of the truck, and my brother took us out. The area was large, but even though the houses were pretty spread out, most of the adults knew each other quite well, and we all knew which houses were for trick-or-treaters. We had hit a lot of the houses that we knew, and by this time it was dark. When it got dark out on the ridge, it got really dark. My brother was not used to driving in such pitch blackness. He was also a little bit intoxicated with his newfound freedom. Once we had gone to all the trick-or-treat houses that our parents had approved for us to go to, he wasn't ready to go home just yet. He wanted to drive around a bit more. Like a dumbass, he decided to go further out into the hills. I remember the road we went down like it was yesterday. It was very, very dark, and the road was so slim. The meager light from the headlights created a very narrow area of light directly in front of the truck. The road was getting more and more overgrown with trees as we went along. More than once, the tree branches began to scrape against the side of the truck. Now, imagine what that was like for us 3 boys. My brother was in the cab, but we were all sitting in the bed of the truck. It was so dark and getting chilly outside. We were so young that we were all still scared of the dark, too. I knocked on the back window of the cab several times, trying to get my brother's attention. Each time he just waved me off. I guess he knew I was wanting to ask him to turn around, but he also couldn't do so. Looking back, I also think he was pretty scared at this point. It wasn't that he didn't want to turn around. He physically couldn't do so. He had no idea how long this lonely country road was going to go. Finally, after what seemed like forever, we came to the end of this road. Unfortunately, the end was a gate that led to a long driveway. At the end of this driveway was a really small old house. There was only a single light on in one of the windows. My brother got out of the car and tried to see if he could open the gate. It was locked though. He came back and told us he was going to go up alone to the house and see if the owner could open the gate for him so he could turn around. He told us to wait where we were. We were terrified about being left alone. He insisted though and handed me his pocket knife. He then jumped over the fence. We couldn't see him as he went up to the house. We were sitting there in the dark, terrified by every sound, every minor noise. A few minutes passed by, and nothing happened. Then, suddenly we heard a gunshot. All 3 of us screamed and started crying. We thought my brother had just been killed. I jumped out of the bed and made my way over to the gate. I saw my brother running back to the gate. Well, more like limping back to the gate. He was moving very fast. Never before nor since have I seen the kind of fear in his eyes that I did that day. He picked me up and forced all 3 of us to get into the cab with him. He rolled the windows up and made us lock the doors. Strangely enough, he started driving in reverse. We tried to get him to tell us what happened, but he refused to do so. He told us he had to concentrate on the road because driving backwards was not something he'd ever had to do for so long. It took us nearly an hour of reversing to finally get back to the main road. When we finally turned around, he immediately sped back home. My dad chewed my brother out big time, but no one told us what happened at the house. It wasn't until years later that he finally told me. He had gone up to the house when the door was answered by an enormous hillbilly. The man's hands were covered in blood. My brother naturally assumed he was just preparing some animal meat, but he got very angry at my brother's presence and refused to open the gate. When my brother asked again, he grabbed his shotgun. My brother tripped down the stairs, which is why he was limping. While he was running back, the guy fired off his shotgun at him. Obviously, though, he didn't get hit. After being yelled at by our father, my dad refused to call the police. He just told my brother he knew who the guy was and that the police wouldn't do anything about it. That's all I know, really. My father passed away and never told us anything more. I think it's pretty scary, wondering what that man was up to and why he was so adamant that my brother leave right away. If he wanted us to leave so badly, why wouldn't he just open the gate so we could do so? And why wouldn't the police do anything about it? It's strange for sure. Yeah, I know. Halloween is supposed to be a time where people play pranks on each other. People get kicks out of scaring other people. But what I think is that this can be rather dangerous. I guess it's really hard to know whether or not someone is just joking around, or if they're using the holiday to cover up their real behavior. Now, here's an example of what I mean. When I was a teenager, I stopped trick-or-treating very late. I went out as late as 15 years old. So, that being the case, when I was an adult and living at home, I always gave out candy to everyone, regardless of how old they were. I had a big old bowl of candy the year this happened, but the trick-or-treaters came out in full force. I had never seen so many children in my life. Thank God I'd gotten so much. By the time I'd given out my last piece, the crowd had mostly dispersed. There were still a few kids here and there. I just turned off my porch light and went and made myself a bowl of popcorn. I was gonna watch a scary movie, or at least something I considered a scary movie. I won't mention what I was gonna watch though, because people will probably tease me real bad for being a wuss. Anyway, I sat down, and about 5 minutes into this movie, someone rang my doorbell. I figured it could only be more trick-or-treaters. I thought turning off my porch light would have been enough of a sign to let them know I had run out of candy. I got up and walked over to the door. I turned on the porch light and opened the door. I was surprised when I noticed 4 teenage boys standing outside. They were all dressed up like the guys from A Clockwork Orange. The boy dressed as Alex put out his bag and said "trick or treat" in a very sinister sounding voice. I paused for a moment. I can't even really tell you why, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to respond right away. I was impressed by the costumes, of course, but that's not why I'd paused. I couldn't even tell you why. Rather than telling the teenagers I was out of candy, I told them to please hang on for a moment. I went back to my cabinet and found a package of full-size Snicker bars. These weren't Halloween candy, of course, just something I kept for myself as a snack. I came back, though, and gave each boy a bar. They looked a bit surprised at getting such a good candy bar. I guess so, at least. They exchanged some very odd glances. They thanked me for the candy, then they left. I went back to watching my movie. I'm not really sure how much time had passed, but after a while, I thought I heard something out on my porch. It wasn't someone knocking on the door or anything, though. It sounded like someone was on my stairs. I got up and walked over to the door. I turned on the porch light and looked out the window. I caught a glimpse of those same 4 teenage boys running away. I don't know why, but I opened the door and looked outside on the porch. There was a note taped on my door. I nearly dropped it when I read what it said. "You're lucky you found some extra candy. We were gonna kill the first person who ran out. We saw your lights off and figured that was you." I reported this to the police. They assured me it was likely just the boys trying to scare me. It was Halloween after all. But, how could I ever really be sure? Their costumes were really good, and they were acting quite strangely, so who knows if they really wanted to act those parts out. What's Halloween without a little bit of fun and trying to scare your friends? When you're younger, it's all about candy and costumes, but when you grow out of that, it turns into a way to razz each other. At least, that's how I always saw it. When I was 14 years old, I wasn't quite ready to stop trick-or-treating. I had just gotten into high school and become a member of a cool group of friends. They made it clear pretty early on to me that we were too cool to act like kids anymore. I remember my mom asking me that year what I wanted to be for Halloween. She wasn't too happy when I told her I'd rather hang out with my friends. My dad, however, seemed to understand, and he gave me permission to hang out with them. He didn't tell my mom this, but he even told me I could stay out later than curfew, since it was Halloween. So there it was that me and my 4 best friends went walking around the neighborhood. A couple of the guys went to make fun of the kids trick-or-treating. I wasn't really into doing that though. I really wanted to be out there doing it with them. We went out past the houses and spent some time walking around the graveyard. That didn't last very long though. There were some even older teenagers than us there, and they made it clear to us pretty early on that we were not welcome. We headed out, and when we got really bored, my friend Jeff had a great idea. There was an old school building on the edge of town that the kids in the neighborhood all considered to be haunted. We decided to go and sneak into the yard. The building itself was not huge, at least not compared to the current school building. When a new high school was built about 10 years before, the elementary school was moved into the old high school, and that left a building just empty. It then sat empty for years, with kids sneaking in all the time, and things like that. Of course, we all really believed it was haunted, just because kids always seem to think that abandoned buildings must have hauntings. Although the building wasn't huge, it was definitely scary. It was right out of town. It was really dark. It had boarded up and broken down windows, and plenty of no trespassing signs as well. Once we got into the yard, our courage failed. All of us pretended like we weren't scared of going in there. But we all knew we really were, and we knew each other knew it as well. We began accusing each other of being scaredy cats in order to hide our own fear. And so it was that we dared each other. Eventually, my friend Jeff was the one who took up that dare. We all went to the back of the building and found a broken back door. Jeff went inside. The dare was that he had to go to the second floor and wave to us from the window, so we knew he went further into the building. He went in. We watched and waited some more. I don't know how much time had passed, but pretty soon, it seemed like more than enough time had gone by for him to get upstairs. Still, we continued to wait, but he never showed up at the top floor. He didn't come back. About an hour and a half passed by before we began to get really worried. Had something happened to him? We couldn't call our parents or the police because we'd be getting in really big trouble. We had to suck up our fear and go into that school on our own. The four of us left and went into the school as a group. If we had been scared to go in alone before, we were even more scared now. The building just had a frightening atmosphere. There was trash and crap everywhere, tons of bottles and cigarette butts all over the place, and plenty of graffiti as well. It was real dark. We checked around and tried to find the stairs once we realized Jeff was not on the first floor. We found the steps and went up them. Jeff was laying down right at the top of the staircase, bruised, bloody, and unconscious. We didn't know what had happened, but we were scared out of our minds. We managed to grab him and bring him to at least enough that we could sort of carry him down the stairs and out of the building. We were of course frightened that whoever had done this to him was going to come back for us as well. Before we could get out once we were off the property though, we were about to call the police. Jeff had come too, and he forbade us from doing so. He just begged to come over to my house to clean up a bit. He didn't want to get in trouble, and he knew if he called the police, he would get bitched out by his parents. At first, he wouldn't even tell us what happened, but when he finally did, it really didn't answer any more questions than we already had. He was suddenly attacked from behind as he was making his way to the top of the stairs. The next thing he knew, we were trying to revive him. He never saw who attacked him. He refused to even get the authorities involved. He had severe bruising, but he just told his parents he had been attacked by a school bully. He wouldn't name the bully, of course. If anything, that old school building had a much scarier reputation afterward, and we were pretty sure that whoever attacked Jeff was still in the building while we were exploring it. We're pretty sure he stayed there for long afterwards. Before I say anything, the most important thing I should mention is that everything we did that night was supposed to just be a joke, all in good fun or whatever. I mean, there's no way we could have predicted what would happen. We never would have done it if we knew someone was going to get hurt. and we never meant to cause any harm. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Me and my friends, who we'll call Ren and Oliver, were trying to figure out what we wanted to do for Halloween. We were all 15, and we figured that meant we were too old for trick-or-treating. We also didn't want to stay in all Halloween night though. Halloween was on a Friday that year, which meant all of our curfews were later than during the week. We wanted to spend that extra time out during the most fun night of the year, doing something that was exciting. What we came up with was a bit cruel, but at the time we thought it would be funny. If anything, it turned out to be scary for us and the person we decided to target. We lived in a relatively big city in the suburbs. Ren, Oliver, and I lived in the same neighborhood as each other, and a few blocks away from us lived a hoarder. Not the kind of hoarder who keeps everything confined to their house either. This lady's whole property was full of junk, like at least 6-foot-high piles of garbage right out on the lawn and in her backyard. It even piled up against the fence next to her neighbor's yard. We all knew who she was, but no one saw her very often. The news had tried to interview her a few times about the mess, but she always refused. We thought it was probably because she must have been embarrassed by what her house had become. Our plan went like this. We'd sneak around her house best as we could, knock on the doors and windows, shake a few doorknobs and make some ghost-like sounds, whatever we could do to scare her a little. I know, you're probably thinking this was just mean. I wish I had some excuse for our actions, but I really don't. Anyway, once it was dark outside, I met up with Ren and Oliver, and in costume, we all headed for her house. A few people asked what we were dressed as, and the only answer we could come up with was bank robbers, since we were all dressed in black with stupid tights over our faces. I was mentally cringing at how ridiculous we must have looked. Looking back, I really should have been cringing at what we were about to do instead. We got to her house, and I was already nervous. For the sake of the story, I'll call this woman Emily. When we walked into her yard, we were met with a smell that can only be described as garbage and death combined. It was so bad that I begged the other guys for us to find something else to do. I thought I was going to puke at any second, right through the tights covering my face. I was gagging, but they just told me to suck it up. We tried looking through her window to see if she was inside, but there was no way we were going to be able to see anything. It was all just blocked up with garbage. On the inside, we could hear what sounded like the TV. We took that as proof she must be in there. Ren said the first thing we should do was each of us go in different windows around the house and begin knocking to try and spook her. I went around to the backyard, which was a big journey through garbage and rotting food. I was already regretting every moment we were there, but I didn't want to ask to leave again. I didn't want the guys to think I was just a loser chicken or whatever. So I got to the back sliding glass door that led to the kitchen and began knocking. As I knocked, I watched inside the house and saw movement coming from the room just outside my view. Making her way through the garbage and toward the door I was standing at was Emily. I hadn't actually seen her in years and gasped when she stumbled into view. She looked horrible, and when I say horrible, I don't mean ugly. She looked sickly, like physically ill. There were huge bags under her eyes, and she'd easily gained at least 150 pounds since the last time I saw her. Her clothes were extremely dirty, and she obviously hadn't showered in who knows how long. I stood there still for a moment before realizing I needed to hide, only my feet were caught in the trash that I was standing in, and no matter how hard I tried to move, there was no way I could get out of there before she saw me. Then I heard a knock at the front door. She must have too, since she turned in the other direction towards it. I was relieved. Oliver climbed over to me to ask what I was doing. When I told him I was stuck, we started to get a little worried. Ren came over to see what we were both doing as well. Both of them decided the funniest thing to do would be to leave me there and see if she caught me. Some friends they were, I guess. They pounded on the back door and ran out of view. As I watched Emily make her way towards me, climbing over the trash in her own home before she opened the sliding glass door. She grinned this awful grin when she saw me. I was struggling to get up and away from her. She giggled like a little girl kind of giggle that they do when they get a doll for Christmas or something. It was almost like this lady had superhuman strength, the way she just picked me up and pulled me out of that trash heap. She practically dragged me inside as I squirmed and begged her to let me go. I said that I was sorry, and I kept screaming for my friends to help me. I looked back at them as they watched her bring me in further and further into the house until I couldn't see them anymore. They looked scared for me too. All I could do was hope they would go and get some help. After dragging me through the filth in her house, she brought me to what I assumed had once been her living room and sat me down in her feces-covered sofa. The smell in her home was even worse than outside. I was gagging and gagging, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't hold it in. I vomited all over myself. The first thing she said to me was something that gave me chills. In a voice I can only describe as one someone uses when they talk to their own baby, she said, "Oh, honey, let mommy clean that up for you. You spit up on yourself again." God, I was freaked out. She wandered away into another room and came out with the dirtiest towel I'd ever seen. As she got closer to me, I just started to cry. She brought the towel up to my face and wiped my mouth and clothes until she said it was clean. I could smell whatever was on that towel, and it only made me throw up once again. She didn't even seem to notice, or at least pretended not to, since this time she didn't clean me up at all. Instead, she sat beside me and grabbed me, placing me down on her lap as she cradled me back and forth. I shoved and pushed, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape her grasp. I kept begging her to let me go. After what felt like forever, she sat me back down to sit on the sofa. She got up and left the room once more. This time, she came back with the corpse of a dead cat. I wanted to cry when she sat it on my lap and told me it liked me and wanted to be petted. There was no way that was going to happen, though. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes of being in that house, I heard sirens. The relief that came over me when I heard the police knocking on the door was insane. She answered, and when they asked if I was inside, she told them the only person in her house was her and her baby. They told her they needed to check to make sure, and after they rounded the pile of garbage blocking me from their view, it was obvious I was no baby at all. They told me to get up and come with them, but she didn't like that idea at all. She started screaming that they couldn't take her baby. She rushed in front of me and wouldn't let me go. They kept telling her to step aside, but she wouldn't do so. When one of them took a step closer, she charged forward. One of the officers yelled to taser her, and within seconds she was on the ground. Well, she was in the garbage, really, but for the purposes of this story, I'll just call it the ground. They arrested her and got me out of the house and into the hospital. I had to shower there since I was covered in God knows what bacteria and diseases that filled that house. Fortunately, I didn't get too sick. And aside from the mental trauma, that night ended up completely fine. Emily was put into some sort of group home or mental hospital or something, and her house was condemned and eventually torn down. I haven't heard much about her since, other than the fact she's still in there. I can't help but feel somewhat guilty for what happened that night. If we had just left her alone, she never would have been put into a position where she'd be tased or hurt in any way. I also can't help but feel, though, like we helped her by getting her out of that home and getting the mental help that she clearly needed. It's something that's been on my mind constantly. It's definitely the worst Halloween I ever had, and by far the scariest. I worked at a laundromat. That's already scary enough in and of itself. We do the laundry service here, and you don't want to know the stuff I've seen customers have the audacity to bring in here. Stuff that the only solution would be to burn what they bring in. It's more often than you'd think. We have to tell people to come back and pick up their dirty laundry because we just can't wash it. Or we won't. They always come and end up washing the stuff in our washers anyway. But hey, if I don't have to touch this stuff, then whatever. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is one that still confuses me to this day. It was Halloween of 2007. We were supposed to close early, but my boss ended up telling me to stay late because he thought being the only laundromat open on Halloween night sounded like a good business opportunity. I don't think he would have thought that if he was the one that had to stay there though. So instead of closing at 6 p.m., we were going to be closing at 11 p.m. instead. I was promised double overtime, so I was all for it. My boss left around 7 and gave me the keys. He told me to lock up before I left. I really thought it would be a super slow kind of night, but it really wasn't. A lot of older folks came in to do their laundry. They said they were grateful for the late hours on Halloween, since it meant there would be fewer kids in the store than usual. By about 10 p.m., everyone was gone, and I didn't expect anyone else to really come in that night. About 20 minutes before closing, though, a man wandered in. He was wearing torn and dirty clothes and reeked of alcohol. I think weed as well. I tried not to judge, though, and told him he wouldn't have time to dry his stuff off before we closed. He was still welcome to use the washer if he didn't mind taking his wet clothes with him, though. I would have stayed longer for him to dry his clothes, but I'd promised my husband I would be home early enough to help put the kids to bed, and 11 p.m. was already pushing it. I really didn't know what to think when the man pulled out some blood-soaked clothing from the black trash bag he was carrying. When I say blood-soaked, I don't mean just some mild, dried blood either. I mean when this guy pulled those clothes out of the bag, they were sopping and dripping wet with blood. I was staring at him wide-eyed. He must have noticed because he turned to me and asked if we had any bleach. He said he was a butcher, and those were his work clothes. As he bought the bleach, all I could say back to him was, His clothes smacked wetly against the sides of the washer as he loaded them in. I watched the water and soap turn dark red as the machine swirled the clothes around. When the buzzer finally went off, signaling this vicious cycle was over, I was relieved he had chosen the quick one. It was only around 10 past when he was done, and I was just excited to go home. When he pulled his clothes out, though, they weren't even close to being clean. He came up to the counter and asked, actually begged to please let him run them again. That meant another 30 minutes of me being there, with this really sketchy guy washing gallons of blood out of his clothes. I felt like I couldn't say no, though. I didn't exactly buy the butcher's story. I asked him what all that blood was from, and this time I actually got a completely different excuse. He said he wasn't actually a butcher. He just used that as an excuse. He said it was actually fake blood he'd bought from a Halloween store for a prank, and that he was playing a prank on his buddies that night. He'd slipped and got it all over himself instead. I didn't exactly buy that either, but I didn't want him to know that. I agreed to let him run them through again. He restarted the washer, adding more and more bleach. The water ran clear this time. He then asked if I wanted to hear a scary story. God knows I didn't. But again, I thought saying no to this man wasn't the brightest of ideas, so I simply said, sure. Here's what he told me. A man was walking in an alleyway at night when he got this urge, an urge he'd been feeling on and off for years. He'd always held back and tried to learn to ignore it, but this time he just couldn't do so. He wouldn't. He had to give in. He had to satisfy this craving. He felt like if he didn't, he would die. His soul would die. It was the urge to kill. The man had experimented with death since childhood. He would dissect dead animals he found and became weirdly fascinated by serial killers and the way they thought it related to them, even wanted to be like them sometimes. Well, the pretty prison version of them at least. Killing animals was fine, but it was never enough. When he got into his later adult years and got a job moving up a level was all he ever thought about. He found himself in that alleyway fully prepared to go up to that level. He just didn't know exactly how. He didn't have a plan or know where to go, who to look for. He just knew this was the night. He'd walked through downtown and saw a woman standing on the corner. obviously a call girl, and asked her if he could buy her services and if they could step into an alley since he had nowhere else to take her. She agreed and they walked together into the darkness. As he walked behind her, he saw an old rusty metal pipe laying on the ground beside a dumpster. He picked it up and hit her in the back of the head with it so hard, she fell to the ground completely unconscious. Her head began oozing blood. He had never seen so much blood come out of the human body before, and he was entranced by it. He sat down next to her and put his hands into the blood, rubbing it all over his face and clothes. He picked her up and laid her head in his lap and watched the blood drain all over his body. The feeling he got was like no other. It was like something he couldn't even describe. I told the man to stop telling me this story, since it was grossing me out and really scaring me. Thankfully he did. Before I knew it, the buzzer to the machine went off again, and he was loading his now pink and wet clothes into his bag, heading out the door. I was a little scared to leave after him, but I just wanted to get home. I grabbed my things, locked up, and rushed quickly to my car. The next day, when I went to open the laundromat in the morning, there were officers waiting there for me. I instantly knew why. There could be no other explanation. When they asked me if the man in bloody clothes had come in the night before, I told them everything. I asked how they knew he'd come in, and they said they were able to follow him on security cameras and street cams, and saw him come into the laundromat from the camera across the street. Turns out the story he told me was 100% true. It was of course about him. Thankfully, the woman he'd tried to murder narrowly survived after someone found her laying there, not long after she was attacked. She'd lost a lot of blood from her skull area and was on life support, but was expected to recover in time. They still haven't found the guy, terrifyingly enough. Thank God I haven't seen him since either. There have been no other instances similar to that, so I don't know if he's attempted anything again. I keep a lookout in the news and pray he never tries to hurt anyone else. Though, with what he said, I know he probably will. I'm scared for anyone who has to face that evil man. I don't know what I would do if I saw him again, but I do know one thing. I'll never work late on Halloween night at a laundromat ever. So I want to start this off by saying I'm not one of those people that thinks kids shouldn't have candy on Halloween or whatever. Growing up, I even hated the people who would hand out apples and pretzels. It was always such a bummer. One year, I was working so much, though, that I forgot to stock up on candy until literally the day of. When I went to the store to grab some, there wasn't any left. The only thing left were some stupid pretzels in the ghost and spiderweb shapes. Mentally, I screamed at myself, but I had no other choice but to get those and hand them out tonight when kids would eventually be coming by. Throughout the whole night, every time I handed out those damn pretzels, I apologized to the kiddos and told them next year I'd have full-size candy bars. No one seemed to be too upset by the pretzels. Some kids even told me they were happy to have something salty to go along with their candy, but I think they were just saying that to be nice to me. It was all fine and dandy until about 10 p.m. I opened the door to a group of teenage boys who were not at all pleased with what I had to give them. I was surprised when they actually had the audacity to complain and call me a fat loser for giving them pretzels instead of candy. One of them even demanded I give them money for ruining their Halloween and not having the good stuff. After around the fifth insult, I just slammed the door in their face. I heard one of them kick it as they were leaving, and one of them shouted, "You'll regret this!" They were just stupid kids, though. I didn't actually think they'd do anything to me, just because one of the many houses they went to happened to give them some pretzels. I turned my porch lights off to signal I was done handing out stuff for the night, and went and sat on my sofa to watch some scary movies. As the night rolled on, a couple hours later as I was watching the original Halloween movie, I heard a crashing sound coming from the front door. I went to see what it was, and I found a rock with a note tied to it. It said, "Do you regret it now?" Believe it or not, I actually chuckled a little because it was so cheesy. I set the rock and note down on the kitchen counter as I went to get a tarp to cover the window so no rain would get in. We were expecting a small storm the next day. Obviously, I was livid when I came back to the room with the tarp and heard another crashing sound coming from the bedroom on the other side of the house. Again, there was a rock with another note that said, "You fat pig, we'll kill you." This time I felt my stomach sink. It was no chuckle. This wasn't funny anymore. I picked up the phone and called the police, who told me they were really busy that night, and it might be a while until someone could come out there. The operator told me to call back if the situation escalated, but if no one was actually hurting me, they couldn't make what was happening to me a priority over anyone else who was calling them that night. They were very low on staff. I just put tarps on both the windows and sat back down to try and enjoy the rest of the movie, I guess. I just couldn't, though. The whole time I was thinking about what that note had said, and the fact I was just a sitting duck with my windows broken in. Just like that, I heard my car alarm start to go off next, but I wasn't about to open my door and go outside to see what was going on. Instead, I headed upstairs and looked out my bedroom window. The windshield had been completely smashed in, and the rest of the car didn't look much better. All I could think about was how these kids must be certifiably insane. To do all this over some stupid pretzels? All at once, bricks and stones came crashing through every window in my house. One narrowly missed my head as it passed through the window I was looking out of the glass of. Glass went flying in every direction. I was screaming as the sound of every window breaking was almost too much to bear. I'd started to become scared for my life. I grabbed the phone and called the police again to tell them that they needed to get there immediately. I saw the neighbors come outside to see what the noise was, and I yelled for them to call the police and get back inside. I rushed downstairs to get out of the house and take refuge with one of the neighbors, but that was never going to happen. At the bottom of the stairs was the same group of kids from earlier, the same kids who had been terrorizing me that night, only this time they were holding bats and rope. I rushed back into my bedroom and locked the door behind me, but that didn't stop them. They broke down the door like it was nothing and rushed towards me, screaming like they were going into battle or something. They beat me while screaming insults and laughing. I remember laying there, becoming numb to every blow that came across my body. The laughing is what disturbed me the most. They were enjoying what they were doing. Eventually, all I saw was black. The police arrived sometime later to find me curled up in the fetal position in my bedroom floor, bruised and bloodied. They called an ambulance that took me to the hospital, and I ended the night with 8 broken ribs, a broken collarbone, torn ligaments, and multiple lacerations to my body. I had a fractured eye socket, a fractured skull. They told me with the beating I got, I was lucky to have survived with no internal injuries or major brain damage. I spent a couple of months in the hospital and had to move in with my mother during my recovery. Thankfully, those idiots were stupid enough to brag about what they did in school. They must have bragged to the wrong person, because one of the people they told ended up going to the police with the information. In all, 8 boys between the age ranges of 14 to 17 were arrested and charged with home invasion and attempted murder, as well as assault with a deadly weapon. They were all tried as adults, and their sentences ranged from 12 to 25 years. Some made deals to talk about what happened to get lighter sentences. I was relieved they got the time they did. I had little hope when they were originally arrested, since they were all minors. I've fully recovered, and the only lasting injury I have is PTSD from that night. All in all, I'm just glad I'm alive today to be able to tell the story. Safe to say, I don't hand out pretzels anymore. I don't hand out anything. I refuse to answer my door on Halloween night. I don't want to risk angering the wrong kids and possibly repeat the scariest night of my entire life.